A staple card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a term for a card that's useful in pretty much any deck. So in this list, we'll be going over some of the easiest to get staples in Master Duel, as all of these are only of the normal quality, the lowest ones in the game. And at number 10, we have the Monk of the Tenyi. Monk of the Tenyi is just a Link 1 monster with no effect that simply requires a non-Link Tenyi monster as one of its materials. So it's not exactly a generic Link 1 monster, but it is part of a very efficient engine you can run. You see, there's another Tenyi card called the Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha, which is a rare quality monster, so not exactly normal rarity, but also easy to get in Master Duel, and Vishuddha has 2 effects, where it can special summon itself from your hand if you don't control an effect monster, and also it can banish itself from your hand or graveyard in order to bounce one of your opponent's cards, as long as you control a face-up non-effect monster. So, the way you use Vishuddha is you special summon it from your hand when you have a clear field, then you use it as a full material to go into Monk of the Tenyi. Then you're able to use Vishuddha's effect from the graveyard, because Monk of the Tenyi is a non-effect monster on the field, where you can then bounce one of your opponent's cards. So with a single Vishuddha, you're able to go +1 in card economy because you end your combo with 1 card on the field, and removal of any one of your opponent's cards, including a back row floodgate, like maybe Skill Drain, and you still have your normal summon free, and there's no other restrictions. And this is why the Monk of the Tenyi and Vishuddha combo were just used in normal TCG decks as a mini engine, and any kind of deck that could support it, because Vishuddha is also just a free level 7 monster in the field if you need that for something instead of going into Monk. Although since this combo really relies on Vishuddha to be used as a staple, it is kind of cheating a little bit by putting Monk of the Tenyi on here in order to mention this combo, which is why it's only at the number 10 spot. Even though this little combo could probably be included in a lot of meta decks much more readily than a majority of the spots on this list. And at number 9, we have Giant Rex. This is a level 4 monster with 2000 attack, which is way higher than normal for a level 4 monster, so it has a negative effect where it can't attack directly. Now, the useful thing about Giant Rex is that if this card is banished, you can then immediately special summon it, and then if you have any banished dinosaur monsters, it will gain 200 attack for each of them. The way Giant Rex is normally played is with any deck that might want to banish it from the graveyard for some kind of play, or you can actually banish it directly from your deck with Gold Sarcophagus, in order to essentially special summon it directly from your deck, since it will just special summon itself immediately after being banished. Its effect to special summon itself is a hard once per turn, but as long as you kinda space out when you banish it, you essentially get a free monster on the field if you're playing some kind of deck that can banish Giant Rex every turn pretty regularly. And at number 8, we have Pentastag. This is a Link 2 monster that just requires any 2 effect monsters as materials, and has the effect where, if you have a linked monster that attacks a defense position monster, they inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. Just as a reminder, that piercing battle damage is one of the very few keywords in Yu-Gi-Oh! And basically just means your opponent will take damage if you attack a defense position monster with an attack position monster, where they take damage equal to the difference between the attack and defense of those 2 cards, instead of normally where they wouldn't take any battle damage. Now, what's great about Pentastag is that it grants piercing damage to basically any monster you want. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, a card is considered linked under 2 conditions, where either it's been point to by a link monster, or if it itself is a link monster pointing to another monster. And because of Pentastag's link arrows are just up and down, it's incredibly easy to start off with Pentastag, and then special summon a monster that you want to give piercing damage to underneath it, or to special summon Pentastag underneath a monster in the extra monster zone. Now, normally piercing damage is not super good of an effect, and you don't really play monsters because they have piercing damage. It's just a nice effect to have if a monster doesn't already have it. It's like a flavorful bonus effect. However, when you can readily give any monster piercing damage from the extra deck with a generic monster, then it kind of opens up a little bit more avenues on how you can push for game, like being a cheap out to an invulnerable Crooked Cook, for example, which you'll run into occasionally in Master Duel. It's not like some super high tiered card, but it does see competitive play, and it is definitely an excellent option if you don't have all the other really good high rarity staples in the extra deck, and can probably win you a game because it's just an excellent tool to just have in the extra deck, because sometimes all you need is a little bit of piercing damage. And at number 7, we have Orbital Hydralander. This is a level 8 monster with 3000 attack, which can special summon itself from your hand if you meet the conditions where you simply have 5 or more monsters in your graveyard that have different names from each other, and no monsters in your graveyard that share the same name. Its special summon effect is not once per turn, so if you have 3 copies of Orbital Hydralander in your hand, you can bring them all out, assuming you meet the conditions for a single one of them. Or if it's bounced back to your hand, you can just bring it out again, which sometimes is beneficial because it has another effect, where on spell speed 2, or during yours and your opponent's turn, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard in order to destroy one card on the field, and this effect is only a soft once per turn. However, before it destroys a card, it checks your graveyard to make sure you don't have any monsters that share the same name. So if the mill of the 3 cards to meet the cost of the effect happens to mill extra copies of the monsters in your graveyard, then it won't actually destroy anything. So because of the conditions of its summoning effect and its spell speed 2 pop, you have to play Orbital Hydralander in a deck that only has cards with 1 copy of monsters each. That way you don't accidentally mill other copies of it and turn off its effect. So, technically, Orbital Hydralander can be played in any deck. It's just most decks like to play multiple copies of their best monsters, which you can't really do with Orbital Hydralander. You'd have to build your deck around Orbital Hydralander, and while it is a really good card, it's not good enough to build your deck around it, which is probably why it's only at the normal rarity. But if for some reason you're playing a deck that can afford to only play 1 copy of each of your cards, or you're playing in a limited format, then it might be worth running 3 Orbital Hydralanders for an excellent main deck boss monster. And at number 6, we have Danger Mothman. This is a level 4 monster which is part of the Danger archetype, where all the Danger main deck monsters have the shared effect where, if the monster is in your hand, you can reveal the card for a hot second in order to activate its effect, where you then stop revealing your hand to your opponent, shuffle your hand, and have your opponent randomly choose 1 card in your hand to discard. And if the monster chosen at random was not the Danger monster who was activating the effect, or one with the same name, you then get to special summon that Danger monster from your hand and then draw 1 card. And the way all of the Danger monsters differ is in their second effects, where they all have an effect that procs if they're discarded by a card effect, i.e. like being discarded by their first effect. And Danger Mothman's second effect is that if it's discarded, both players get to draw 1 card, and then both players discard 1 card. So basically Dark World dealings. And out of all of the normal rarity dangers, Danger Mothman is definitely one of the best with its discard effect. Although the good thing about dangers is their first effects, and how none of the first effects have a once per turn on them. So if you activate a danger from your hand in order to try to special summon it, and your opponent chains an Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring to it, you can just do it again, even if its effect was negated once, because the effect is not once per turn. And because the first effect is not once per turn, it is possible for danger decks to just draw through every card in their deck in 1 turn, if they're really lucky with them not hitting in their danger monsters and getting them discarded. In fact, there were some really competitive decks in the past that were aiming to do exactly that. And because the first effect of all the dangers is so good, it allows you to basically play them in any kind of deck that wants to send cards to the graveyard, and might want extra cards in the field to be used as link materials, or for any other kind of extra deck summoning. So technically, all of the danger monsters are good, because the good part of the dangers is their first effect, which they all share. And a lot of them are in the lower rarities, so it's possible to play a full engine of danger monsters without any of them being SR or higher. And at number 5, we have Right Hand Shark. This is a level 4 fish monster, which has the effect that, when it's normal summoned, you get to add a left hand shark from your deck to your hand. This is rarely how the card is actually played though. The good part of this card is everything else about it, where its second effect is that if this card is in your graveyard and you control no monsters, you can special summon it, but then it's banished if it leaves the field. And if it's used as an Xyz material for a monster, or you're only using water monsters as its materials, then that Xyz monster gains the effect where it can't be destroyed by battle. And here's the fun thing about Right Hand Shark. It can apply this battle protection to any Xyz monster, just as long as the other material is also water. So it can provide battle protection to something like number 59 Cooked Cook, in order to have an invulnerable monster in the field that can't be destroyed by battle, or affected by card effects. And also another interesting thing about Right Hand Shark is that if it's detached as an Xyz material, it will just go right back to the graveyard. So you can use the effect next time your field is clear. The card does say it's banished when it leaves the field if it's special summoned with its effect, but being detached as an Xyz material doesn't count as it leaving the field, and is kind of a workaround to these kinds of effects, where as long as you just don't use it for some other kind of summon, and only an Xyz summon, you'll always have Right Hand Shark in the graveyard where it can use this effect to come back again. And at number 4, we have Bottomless Trap Hole. This is a trap card which can only be activated in response to a monster being summoned, where it destroys all monsters with more than 1500 attack that were summoned, and then banishes them. So if your opponent summons a whole bunch of monsters at the same time, like say through the effect of Tri-Brigade Revolt, or through a Pendulum summon, you can banish all of the choice cards that meet the conditions of having 1500 or more attack. Normally you just use it on a single summon though to banish one monster with more than 1500 attack. But since it can be used on multiple monsters, Bottomless Trap Hole was actually on the ban list for a long time, at either 2 or 1 copies per deck. Currently it's unlimited, and for some reason it's only at a normal quality card in Master Duel, and that's probably because it rarely sees any competitive play anymore. And that's mainly because if you're playing against a meta deck, a lot of them have ways to just dodge the effect of Bottomless Trap Hole, or destroy the card before you have a chance to activate it, or just have some kind of negate that can stop it. But not all of them, and it's still pretty effective against meta decks. And especially non-meta decks, because a lot of decks just don't recover from having their key pieces banished. Take Eldritch for example. If Eldritch the Golden Lord is special summoned through the effect of Elixir of a Scarlet Sanguine, or Elixir of Black Awakening, you can banish Eldritch and permanently deprive your opponent of one of their key resources. And you can kind of beat an Eldritch player if you're able to banish all 3 copies of their Golden Lord. But Bottomless Trap Hole won't be able to banish Eldritch if it's special summoned through its own effect, since Eldritch gains destruction immunity for around the first 2 turns after it comes out. And Bottomless Trap Hole does need to destroy the monster first before it banishes it. There's also the fact that a lot of meta decks just don't like to play trap cards at all, and there's lots of really good staple trap cards in the game that you can play instead of Bottomless Trap Hole, like Ice Dragon's Prison, which accomplishes a similar thing but without targeting or destroying, so Bottomless doesn't see tons of competitive play. But it's still a really nice option at a very low rarity that you should keep in mind. And at number 3, we have Paleozoic Olenoides. This is a trap card which has the effect to simply destroy any spell or trap card on the field. And being able to destroy a spell or trap card is pretty good in every deck. Normally, there's just other higher rarity cards that are able to accomplish the same thing, but without being a trap card that needs to be set first. However, Paleozoic Olenoides has the other effect, which is shared amongst all the Paleozoic trap cards, where it can special summon itself from the graveyard as a monster if another trap card is activated on the field. And while it's a monster, it's treated as a level 2 Aqua type with 1200 attack that's immune to monster effects. So actually kind of hard to get rid of for most meta decks, as normally they'll have to enter the battle phase in order to attack over it, or waste a similar spell and trap card removal on it. And since it's a level 2 Aqua type monster, you could potentially use 2 copies of Paleozoic Olenoides to go into Totally Awesome, an Xyz monster that can negate and steal cards. And there is one other benefit of having a spell or trap card removal on a trap card, and that's having an out to something like Imperial Order. Imperial Order is a floodgate which can just negate the effects of all spell cards, and is normally played in floodgate decks that want to protect their back row, because some of the best spell and trap card removal cards in the game are things like Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, and Twin Twisters. But Paleozoic Olenoides can destroy Imperial Order, so the budget option of those better cards can actually be more useful sometimes. Especially since it comes back as a monster later on that can be used as material for some kind of extra deck summon, so it's actually a +1 in card advantage too, if you're able to make full use of both of its effects. And at number 2, we have Geonator Transverser. This is a Link 2 monster that just requires any 2 effect monsters as materials, and has the effect where, if this card is linked, this linked card and the monster it points to can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And remember that linked just simply means that a link monster is pointing to something and it includes itself. So pretty easy to grant one of your monsters and its self-protection from destruction effects by just having it point to at least one of your monsters, or one of your opponent's monsters, as it has an arrow that can point on your opponent's side of the field, which is necessary for its second effect, where if this card is pointing to 2 monsters, you can switch control of both of those monsters. And because of this, if your opponent has a monster in the middle monster zone, or the rightmost monster zone, it's vulnerable to being stolen by the effect of this card, where you can just give your opponent one of your weaker cards in the field, like maybe a Paleozoic Olenoides that was summoned after using its second effect. And one really good thing about this card is that it doesn't target, as it simply denotes pointing to a monster rather than having to target a monster. So it's an excellent form of removal against just a lot of boss monsters that might have some indestructible effects, or can't be targeted, just as long as they're in the middle or rightmost monster zones. So if you don't want your indestructible boss monster being stolen, make sure you avoid bringing them out in the middle or leftmost card zones. The effect of this card is so good, it's probably one of the best low rarity extra deck monsters in the game. And I actually didn't find out about it until I had released my video on the best low rarity extra deck monsters in the game, and my chat told me about this wonderful gem that I had definitely missed. And at number 1, we have Parallel Exceed. This is a level 8 monster which has the effect that, if you link summon a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand to a zone that a link monster points to. Additionally, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon another copy of this card from your deck. But it has another effect where, if this card is special summoned by its own effect, it becomes level 4 and its attack and defense become halved. And all of its effects are a hard once per turn. So, how you use this card is you just link summon any monster from whatever archetype you're using and have a Parallel Exceed in your hand, where you'll then be able to special summon it from your hand and get another copy of it from your deck, essentially going +1 in card advantage, while giving you 2 level 4 monsters in the field and not using your normal summon. And this is pretty good in pretty much any Link deck that can afford to play Parallel Exceed. It's such a no-brainer extender option, it doesn't lock you out of anything special, it just gives you free monsters in the field while being super generic in how it does it. The only real problem with this card is if you draw all 3 copies of them in your opening hand, as you'll have nothing but Garnets, because they can only special summon other copies of themselves from the deck. But you can eventually special summon them from your hand, so they're not completely dead either. The Parallel Exceed engine is so good, it's kind of a wonder why it's only at the normal rarity, because it's played in all kinds of decks, including meta decks, and is a staple at that. They can allow you to easily go into something like Baguska to shut down your opponent's card effects, or go into an Abyss Dweller to turn off your opponent's graveyard. You can go into some very powerful Floodgate Xyz monsters while just doing your plays like normal, as long as you can afford to play 3 copies of them in your main deck. In fact, most people only opt to play 2 copies of the card, since you can't really special summon the 3rd copy anyway. So because Parallel Exceed is just such a good card that you actually want to play for its own merits, rather than trying to replace it later on like you do a lot of the other cards in this list, it's easily the best normal rarity stable monster in Master Duel, and almost seems like an oversight that it was put at such a low rarity in the first place. However, it's a good thing they did, because it's just an easy engine you can add to pretty much any deck that's super cheap to craft. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other normal rarity cards that I might have missed, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.